Hi, everyone. So I'm here to introduce Curtis Armour, aka the Canadian Liquorfish, who's going to be presenting browser and Windows hardening. So give it up for Curtis.
All right, so let's jump into this. So who am I? I'm an information security consultant for eCentire. I've spent about 4 years in the security space, and awkward hugs are accepted.
That was just beautiful.
So the agenda today. So I'm going to give a brief introduction on why I wrote this talk. Going to give some overview on the current threat landscape, and go into preventing the exploitability of hosts. So the goal for this talk. So the overall goal is to help protect people, hosts and clients. So web browsers today are used as an attack surface. And it's not just the web browsers, because they've actually added like lots and lots of security layers on top of themselves. It's actually third-party applications that are called through the web browsers. So my talk goes over layers of free technology to help layer on top of what you already have, and it'll help protect you. And I hope at the end of it, you'll have a better understanding of the current threat landscape and how you can be exploited, and essentially limiting that. So let's talk about attack vectors. So what are the main threats for end users on the web right now? So we're talking about exploit kits, drive-by downloads, malvertising, and social engineering. And in a lot of cases, once they get onto your system, they want to drop something for persistence. And in the current threat landscape, it's binaries, applications. So, you know, in some of the research that we've seen, we've actually seen memory injection used. But I don't go into that in my talk. It's specifically about what we see now and what the most common attacks are. So exploit kits. So what is an exploit kit? So an exploit kit is essentially a bundle of exploits hosted on a server, and it uses a piece of JavaScript to figure out what's vulnerable and what they should serve you. So what does an exploit kit target? Targets vulnerable applications. So this can be the browser itself, Silverlight, Flash, and any third-party application that can be used for remote code execution and get someone on your box. So how do they get to exploit kits? So there's something called an exploit gate, and it's like a landing page for exploit kits. So you'll hit the exploit gate, it'll see you and then serve you up to either a random exploit or one that's specific to the vulnerable application that you're running. And so what are the most active exploit kits that are running today? So here's an example of some of the exploit kits that we see and the common vulnerabilities that they exploit. And this is an older exploit table, so if you guys have all been reading the news and looking at the hacking team dump, obviously the new 0 days have been added to these exploit kits, and we are seeing them in the wild today. So let's talk about Flash for a bit. So 3 0 days released in the past week or so. 2 weeks ago, Adobe released 36 critical vulnerabilities. And what are we doing? So Firefox, once the 0 days came out, Firefox pulled all support for Flash, and then made this big publicity thing. And then what actually happened was they released the patch, and then Firefox reinstated it in all of its browsers. So the thing is that Flash is still used. We've been trying to replace it with HTML5, and yet a lot of companies still haven't taken the time to develop and roll out this technology. So we see like Twitch, video streaming service, still uses Flash. It won't default to HTML5. And HTML5 is it's a lot more secure in the sense that it's your browser that's taking in the content and generating it for you. So it's the browser instead of a third-party application that's closed source. So it's an open standard. And if you have protection on top of your browser, even if there is HTML5 remote code execution, then you have something that could potentially catch it and stop it anyways. So drive-by download. So what is a drive-by download? So a drive-by download refers to an unintentional download of computer software from the internet. So this can happen a few ways. So you can simply just be tricked into downloading something you thought was legitimate, which is not, and installing adware or spyware. Or you can get hit with something like an exploit kit, which exploits something on your system and then felicitates a download onto your machine. So obviously, You visit a compromised site, which is hosting an exploit kit, which then ends up in a download. You visit a compromised site, which leads you to an exploit gate, which serves you a random exploit. You get exploited, downloads the system. And then, or it could be even a legitimate site, hosting a compromised ad network. And then you hit an EK, and then you get a download. All right, so malvertising. It's the spread of malware via online advertising. And this has become a big problem. So what I can tell you is that in the last few months, the investigations into these types of incidents has changed dramatically. So what happened was they used to not be using proper encryption. So we would see a client hit a legitimate site, get redirected through an ad network, and then we'd see all the redirections, then follow it, and then see it hit an exploit kit. So that was easy because then we could see the whole chain of events and then trace it back and then be able to block it. Now what's happening is we're seeing that it's using proper encryption. The client will go to a site, a legitimate site, and then hit ad networks and then be served an exploit kit. And that's all we have. We have nothing to see there because it's all encrypted. So we just have to assume now that this is where it's coming from. So what does this mean for users? It's that legitimate sites are now a risk because if you're hosting ad content, then those can be infiltrated and then they can essentially serve you an exploit kit. And obviously social engineering. This has always been a problem. Gaining users' trust, taking advantage of them. We see a lot of shotgun malware and spam, so just a lot of spam campaigns going on. It's not specific to targeting a specific firm. It's just sending it out, trying to drop ransomware, trying to collect on the money and the hosts that you've compromised. So this also goes into like the most realistic way of compromising an organization is through social engineering, so targeted attacks. So you essentially host your own exploit kits, send a bunch of spam, get them to go to your exploit kits, and then get footholds within the network. And then obviously restricting local access on these computers and user training, consistent user training is always the way to go. So I gave you a brief introduction to the threat landscape. So let's talk about what we can do to help protect these things from happening. So ad blocking. Ad blocking is a big one. I went into the malvertising and how it's becoming an issue. So there's multiple ways of doing this. So for corporate networks, we have proxy ad stripping and DNS sinkholing. So the best way to do it within a large corporation is by doing it at the egress point. So if you can strip everything out through the proxy, that's the most cost-effective and configuration-effective method of doing it. So like RMport has the ability to do this, Blue Code has the ability to do this. And if you have your own DNS infrastructure or you have a third party that's hosting it for you, you can also sinkhole ad networks if you put it into the records. So not all companies, and like for home users as well, you're not going to have your own proxy unless, some of us have our own open source type stuff like that. But there's also a host-based method for doing this. So there's actually extensions like AdBlocker Plus and uBlock that have the ability to block this on browser load. And what's really cool about it is that you can actually dynamically block things. So say an ad network is serving up ad content and it's not blocked with the regex that they currently have. You have the ability to right-click and block it, and then that'll store the way that it's blocked it and then push it across all the other browsing that you do going forward. So it's pretty handy. Exploit prevention. So say you get hit with an exploit, you didn't have your software uploaded, or it's a 0-day. How do you protect yourself? So there's these cool applications. So EMAT was put out by Microsoft, and Malwarebytes Anti-Exploit is obviously put out by Malwarebytes. But it's really cool. So it has the ability to catch like ROP gadgets and certain API calls that are outside of the normal process and stop it instantly. So I don't know if anyone here saw it, but Malwarebytes put out blog posts in the threat intelligence team that showed them protecting zero-day flash exploit from landing on Internet Explorer just by running Malwarebytes Anti-Exploit. So obviously, it's an arms race always when we're talking about attacking and defending. So with EMET, we've seen offensive security release bypasses on this. So if you know exactly what they're running, you can obviously bypass it because you know what they're looking for. But the thing is if you don't build this into your exploits, then how are you supposed to know like how how to bypass this. And so we're going to see attackers having to start building more and more checks into their code. And they're going to have to bypass these types of technologies because they're effectively stopping these things. So adding layers is a good thing. When we add layers, we add complexity. EMET and Malwarebytes on a corporate deployment, it's a little harder to control. On a single user and small business deployment, it's easier. Application whitelisting. So what is application whitelisting? So essentially is restricting what programs may run on a computer versus like trusting everything. You have a list of applications that have been approved to run. And why would you want to implement something like this? So with exploit kits and the current state of exploit kits, we see someone gets compromised, and at that point, the attacker needs to get some sort of persistence on the box. So what will happen is they'll download a payload, it'll be encrypted, and then they'll unencrypt it on the box, and then run it. So if you have application whitelisting and you have it restricted so that binaries and executable code cannot run within specific directories, even if they download onto your system, they won't be able to execute it. So a cool tool that helps utilize this is AppLocker. So it's available if you have Windows Server 2008 R2, Windows 7 Ultimate, and Windows 7 Enterprise. And you can make rules for paths. So if anyone downloads anything within the user directories, and you have restricted admin, of course, then they can't execute anything. So even if you get exploited and someone puts something in your system, they're not going to get that second payload from executing. And then so you can add whitelists for publishers. So when you do this, you're going to break a lot of things. So the way that applications update is they'll download a new binary, run that code, and then update what your current instance is. So with Chrome, this is how they do it. So you would actually have to have a publisher whitelist for Chrome. So anything that's downloaded by Chrome is allowed to run within this directory so you don't break things. So there's also path and file hash. So if you have specific files that are needed to run within the environment, you can add bypasses for those as well. So there's a lot of testing that goes into application whitelisting. And this is different from process whitelisting. So when you get into the memory, the direct memory injection from exploit kits, then you got to start looking into process whitelisting and heuristics. So browser hardening. So what browsers are the most secure? And I have most in quotes, of course. So when I ask myself this question, I think, who does the most research? Who has the best bug bounty programs? Who has the least amount of remote code executions within the past few years? And who has a dedicated security team for improving on the product? So I feel that Chrome is pretty strong in this. Some argue that Firefox, with its default configuration, is pretty good as well. And then also when you're dealing with anything with Google, there's a bit of privacy that you give up unless you've configured it specifically to protect yourself. So that's the point. And what can be done to browsers to increase their protection? So there's a whole bunch of plugins, configuration changes, of course exploit protection, and obviously patching that can harden it. And so general notes for browser hardening. So when we're dealing with security and we're adding all these layers, it's not always making things more efficient. It's not always making things easier for people. It's about protecting them. So there's kind of some giveaway when you're dealing with security. So all this, when you add all this stuff up, it takes extra memory, it takes extra CPU, and it takes extra time to protect yourselves. So configuration hardening. Internet Explorer has these cool things called Microsoft Security Zones. So it's a way to segregate third-party applications and how they're executed. So say you have a local corporate network and you need legacy applications. You don't want those applications to be open for the internet to call. So if you're browsing on a legacy system internally, you want like an old version of Java to be able to be executed so you can run it. But when you go out to the internet, you don't want that same Java application to be able to be called from the browser. So there's these zones that you can segregate the communication from an internal network to an external network. And it's really useful. And it can be pretty granular. So it can restrict JavaScript externally, internally, ActiveX, all the other third-party applications that it uses. Here's some generic ones for Firefox. These are just some simple configurations. So warn me when third-party applications are trying to install, block attack sites, block web forgery sites. Chrome, there's enable phishing and malware protection, block pop-ups, block sites from downloading multiple files. And then one of the biggest ones is ask to run and click to play. So all of these three browsers, Chrome, Firefox, and Internet Explorer, have the ability to ask to run first. So say you're browsing on the internet, you get served an exploit kit because you're on some random site. It will not be able to exploit you unless you allow the application to run. So this only adds so much protection. If you have a user that doesn't know about computer security and they're on some random site that isn't supposed to be running Flash, if they still click run, it's going to exploit them. But at least at this point, it's not going to automatically exploit them through a redirect. So, and this is a really important one, so I would take note on that. So plugins and extensions. So for Firefox, Internet Explorer, and Chrome, obviously JavaScript is one of the biggest threats because like we use it in normal, legitimate applications, and the attackers use it to enumerate our web browsers and redirect us to bad things. But I didn't really focus it on this talk because it's needed for business use, and it's really hard to whitelist and block things that are only malicious and then allow for like normal business operations to continue. So I didn't really talk about that. Obviously, it's really important, so do some more research if you want to tackle that problem. Another one is Bitdefender Traffic Light, so it blocks blacklisted sites from Bitdefender. The next one is AdBlocker Plus and uBlock, so that's host-level ad blocking. I went over that before. HTML5 Everywhere. This is just a generic one because each of the browsers have their own plugins. So for Chrome, they have HTMLify. So it'll force HTML5 over Flash or any of the other technologies it replaces. And obviously, I've talked about how HTML5 is a little more secure than Flash at this moment. HTTPS Everywhere. So I haven't really gone into this much. I'm not sure if anyone here had read through all the Hacking Team dump stuff. So there's some pretty shady stuff going on there. So essentially what would happen was at one point they needed to get a bunch of bots in Europe. So what they did is they took an appliance, they installed it at the ISP, and then they started intercepting all HTTP traffic. And when they did that, they started injecting JavaScript, redirecting people to random exploit kits. And then, of course, we know about all their Flash 0 days, so that would work really, really well. So HTTPS Everywhere enforces encryption and allows people to not do that to you. So even if it's at the ISP level, they would have to jump in front of your certificate, spoof you, and then at that point you know something was going on. And it also, HTTPS Everywhere blocks HTTP request and response that are on websites, so it can effectively block any way for you to get injected. And then we have Disconnect, which blocks malware and tracking, tells you who's tracking you, and keeps your search results private. So eCentire has been working on this Chrome extension, and if you saw Roy's talk, he went into it very briefly. And it's called Simon Interceptor. There's some great branding here for you all to see. So what is Simon? So Simon is the largest tracker of security reports, which includes malware, phishing, botnets, all that good stuff. I think it's more than 4 million IPs in the database and 10 million security events as of this morning, Roy? And almost 200 sources ingested daily. So what is Simon Interceptor? So it prevents web requests to domains that Simon has deemed malicious. Recent events from Simon are displayed for websites visited, and it has the ability to whitelist domains at users' discretion. So it's very similar to AdBlock Plus, but we're trying to utilize the threat intelligence that we've gathered by scouring the internet. And it uses Google Chrome's web request API to intercept web requests as they happen. The API allows requests to be filtered by a collection of URL patterns created from the domains in Simon's database, and requests can either be blocked, canceled, or redirected. So I hope you've learned what threats are out on the open web, and how to add additional layers of free protection, and that Simon Interceptor could be really sweet. Thanks. right, are there any questions? You first.
What have you seen with mitigations such as sandboxing and stuff like that? Are those still effective tools, or are they being bypassed right here?
Yeah, so sandboxing is good as long as you're not dealing with sandboxes that are affected with venom. If you can jump out of the sandbox, then you're essentially screwed anyways. But yeah, segregating through sandboxing is a valid way of doing that. Like, so when we do threat intelligence, there's always sandboxes, and then we go through those, do our research, and then kill the sandbox, and then kind of keep doing it that way to have a clean system. But like, it's not always easy for like someone to constantly be running sandboxes and making new requests, right? Because usually kill the machine afterwards if you want no risk of having anything transferred over. Did that answer your question? Yeah? Jason?
Yeah. What's your thoughts? Like, don't you think that Lynx is the better security browser?
Sorry, what?
Lynx?
Lynx?
Before this time, it's text-based browser.
Oh, yeah, of
I thought Lynx
course.
would be the best security browser, and you didn't list it there as the best security browser.
I was only comparing the three main ones for Windows
Oh,
at this
okay.
time.
So Lynx doesn't get involved.
I have used Lynx before, yeah, and it doesn't interpret JavaScript, right? So like that's one of the
It's
best
really
ones.
secure.
Of course. Yeah. If I could view everything text-based on the internet, I wouldn't. And that's how you view Tor, right? Everything's text-based. You strip everything else out.
Those YouTube videos would be really hard to watch.
Well, also, what do you think about browser helper objects? It's like, you mentioned that much about browser helper objects, like the Internet Explorer. Like, do you see them attacking that a lot?
Browser help objects?
VHOs.
VHOs? I don't even know
VHOs,
what
browser
that
helper
means.
objects. Oh.
I'll do some research.
Yeah. That's like,
I know that plugins themselves, when you protect the browser with like third-party anti-exploit technology, it effectively protects the plugins themselves as well, because they're a part of the browser.
I just want to play the girl call.
He was afraid of people like you.
So you mentioned application whitelisting. What about like monitoring for applications executing outside of normal program file folders and things like that?
Yeah.
Because usually when you drive by, are they downloaded to temporary and execute from there, or pull it from a non-standard location?
Yeah, I'm not entirely sure how granular you can get with AppLocker, but like definitely for SIM technologies or anything on the host level.
Well, yeah, I think you can monitor where it's the executable is being
Yeah.
executed from. This is basic Windows logs, but I was wondering if they're typically in a non-standard location.
Oh, well, so like with ransomware, with like CryptoWall, you saw it in like temp data and like a few places like that. But if you want to really go hardcore, it'd be like anything that the user can touch, so that they can't put it anywhere on the drive. It can't execute anywhere on the drive without a whitelist for the binaries that you allow.
Stops for Java updates.
Yeah, but if you know where the Java updates are going, and also you can do a publisher whitelist rule for that too. So, because that's how you get around Chrome. It does it the same way. Yeah, there's a lot of, the application whitelisting is pretty hardcore, but once if you have a standard image and you have standard applications that are running, it'll take you like a day or two to sort it out, and then you can implement it. And then how is malware going to execute other than memory injection, right? We don't see a lot of that right now. Cool? Awesome. Thanks, guys.